at 10 years old, my dad told me, you're going to get a job, you're going to go fishing to get money for school clothes, and you're going to start smoking. So handed me a stack of Playboys, a cigarette, and told me to start pitching fish.
Josh Harris grew up chasing crab on the icy Bering Sea, following in the footsteps of his father, Captain Phil Harris, one of the most beloved figures on Deadliest Catch. Viewers watched him become the man his dad hoped he'd be, steering the Cornelia Marie through danger and loss. But off-camera, Josh's life took turns no one could have predicted. Family heartbreak, hidden struggles, and a past he couldn't escape would one day collide in a way that changed everything. What looked like a story of resilience and legacy slowly unraveled into something far darker. This is the untold journey of Josh Harris. The highs, the heartbreaks, and the haunting fall from grace. The shocking confession. When Josh Harris sat down for an interview in 2022, no one expected him to say what he did. The host casually asked if he'd ever thought about walking away from fishing, and without missing a beat, Josh said he had, every single day. He didn't dance around it or try to sound polite. He just said it, like someone finally admitting something they'd been holding in for too long. Especially after his father passed away, he said he couldn't stand it anymore. He resented fishing. Now, that's not something you'd expect to hear from Josh Harris. He grew up on fishing boats, learned the ropes from one of the most famous captains in the business, and eventually took command of his father's vessel, the Cornelia Marie. Fishing wasn't just what he did. It was the foundation of his entire life. So, to hear him say he resented it made people stop for a moment. This wasn't a case of someone getting tired of their job. This was deeper. It was personal. Josh explained that things had changed over the years. The money wasn't what it used to be. The work had gotten harder, the risks heavier, and the rewards smaller. He said there was a point when things looked pretty grim, a stretch of time when he couldn't find the spark that used to keep him going. The Hillstrand brothers, old friends from the industry, were the ones who helped him get back on his feet. They encouraged him to keep going, to push through when he felt like giving up. But even then, his motivation wasn't about passion. It was practical. He wanted to work hard for a few more years, earn enough, and then step back to be with his kids while they were still young enough to want him around. It's interesting, isn't it? Because the way he talked about it, you could tell this wasn't the story of a man proudly carrying his father's torch. It was the story of someone who felt trapped beneath it, like the legacy was both an honor and a burden. He stayed because he felt he had to, because leaving would mean turning his back on everything his father built. But that kind of obligation wears you down, especially when the thing you're doing no longer feels like your own. So what happened? What could make someone grow to resent something that once felt like destiny? To understand that, you'd have to go back to January of 2010, a moment that was caught on camera and seen by millions of people watching Deadliest Catch. It wasn't just another storm or another dangerous haul. It was the day everything changed for Josh Harris. The stroke that changed everything. It was January 29, 2010, and the Cornelia Marie had just finished another grueling run in the Bering Sea. The crew was offloading crab at St. Paul Island, Alaska, doing what they always did after weeks of sleepless nights and icy waves that could knock the wind out of anyone. Captain Phil Harris, as usual, was running on fumes and determination. He had been pushing himself hard, working through crushed discs in his back that left him in constant pain, and running mostly on coffee, cigarettes, and whatever quick energy drinks he could get his hands on. Everyone knew Phil was tough, but that kind of pace catches up eventually. The boat's engineer, Steve Ward, went to check on him in his cabin that afternoon and found him on the floor. At first glance, it must have seemed unreal. The man who had spent his whole life commanding storms now lying helpless on the ground. One side of his face was frozen, His arms wouldn't move, and the left half of his body had gone completely still. When Josh got the call to dial emergency services, everything in him must have known this wasn't just exhaustion. It was something bigger, something that was about to change everything. Phil was airlifted from St. Paul Island to a hospital in Anchorage. The doctors didn't sound optimistic. Years at sea had taken their toll, and his body was tired. But then, in the way Phil had always done, he surprised everyone. He woke up from his medically induced coma. For a few short days, Josh and his younger brother Jake got to speak with their dad again. 9 days in total, they stayed at the hospital, trying to stretch out every hour, every word, every familiar look. What most people remember, though, isn't just that Phil fought to stay alive. It's what he asked for while he was still in that hospital bed. He told the crew of Deadliest Catch to keep the cameras rolling. Even then, even in that fragile state, he wanted people to see what it meant to live and sometimes die doing the thing you love. So they filmed every emotion, every reaction. Josh and Jake trying to hold it together. The crew pacing the hallways, stunned. The faint hope that maybe somehow he'd get another chance to step back onto his boat. Then came February 9th, 2010. Phil Harris was gone. He was 53 years old. The episode that showed those moments aired later that July, and over 8.5 million people tuned in to watch. For the Discovery Channel, it was one of their most watched broadcasts ever. But for Josh and Jake, it wasn't a TV event. It was a loss that would ripple through every part of their lives. After the funeral, reality hit hard. The two brothers inherited their father's shares of the Cornelia Marie. The boat that had always been their home suddenly became their responsibility. Josh, at 27, found himself sitting in the same captain's chair his father had once occupied. A chair that no longer felt like a symbol of pride, but one of pressure. He wasn't just managing a crew or running a business. He was trying to fill shoes that no one could truly fill, while cameras captured every uncertain moment. Every decision mattered now. How to steer the boat, when to haul, how to keep everyone safe in weather that could flip a vessel in seconds. There was no space to grieve properly when the sea demanded constant focus, and even when Josh tried to push forward, the shadow of his father was always there. Every dock, every engine sound, every late-night radio call brought memories rushing back. He had to pretend he was ready, even when he probably wasn't. But while Josh was holding everything together on deck, something else was falling apart beneath the surface. Jake's downward spiral. Between the two Harris brothers, Jake had always been the one who felt things a little deeper. He carried his emotions close, and when life hit hard, it hit him harder than most. His struggles with pain medication started back in high school, after a skateboarding accident that left him relying on pills to get through the pain. What started as a way to cope slowly turned into something that began to control him, even before most people around him realized how serious it was. There was a time, during the early years of Deadliest Catch, when Jake tried to be open about what he was going through. He had that difficult talk with his dad, Phil, and anyone who watched could see how raw it was. Phil didn't turn away from him. He stood by him, helped him get into rehab, and there was this sense that maybe things were turning around. For a while, they did. But then, when Phil passed away in 2010, it felt like the floor dropped out from under Jake. Grief can do strange things, especially when it mixes with old habits. Jake and his brother Josh tried to run the Cornelia Marie together after their father's death, and for a time it looked like they might be able to keep it going. But as the years rolled by, it became harder for Jake to stay grounded. He left the show in 2012, and that decision seemed to mark the beginning of a rough chapter that would stretch for years. There were arrests, relapses, short-lived recoveries, and more headlines than anyone would want attached to their name. In 2010, he was arrested for driving under the influence. After that came other run-ins with the law and attempts to get clean that didn't last. People close to him said he'd do well for a while, then something would trigger him, and the cycle would start again. Then came November of 2016. The kind of moment that changes everything. Jake was in Washington State and accepted a ride from a man and a woman he met at a casino. It should have been an ordinary night. Instead, it turned into something out of a nightmare. The two people attacked him, beat him so badly that his skull was fractured, and stole a few $1,000s before leaving him on the side of the road. It was a brutal, senseless act, and when the police found him, they rushed him straight to the hospital. His injuries were so severe that his recovery took months. The attackers were caught eventually, but that didn't undo what had happened. The physical pain healed slowly, but the emotional damage lingered much longer. Josh, meanwhile, was watching all this unfold from a distance, carrying a mix of helplessness and hope. He had seen his brother try to rebuild before, and he wanted to believe this time would be different. There were glimpses of progress, small signs that Jake was getting back on his feet, taking things one step at a time, even confronting some of the grief he'd buried for years after losing their father. By 2021, Josh was talking publicly about how Jake was improving, taking baby steps, focusing on recovery. But the truth was, the road was never steady. In 2019, Jake was sentenced to 18 months in jail after a confrontation with a park ranger turned into a police chase. When they caught him, they found heroin and materials linked to distribution. It was another low point in a series of them. Josh tried to stay optimistic, telling people his brother was still fighting to get better, that it wasn't over. Then, not long after that, another arrest came, another DUI charge. For Josh, it must have been an exhausting mix of heartbreak and duty. He was juggling so much, running the Cornelia Marie, keeping his father's legacy alive, appearing on television, and trying to be the kind of brother Jake could lean on. But no matter how much love or support he gave, it couldn't fix everything. Addiction and grief have their own timelines, and they don't follow reason. And while the public saw bits and pieces of Jake's struggle play out, what many people didn't realize was that Josh was quietly dealing with his own battles. The financial side of keeping the Cornelia Marie running was far more complicated than most viewers ever knew. After their father's death, the boat became the center of a tangled web of ownership issues and legal disputes that dragged on for years. And while Jake was trying to heal, Josh was trying to keep the family's livelihood from slipping through his hands. It's strange how two people can go through the same loss, but end up walking entirely different paths afterward. For Jake, grief pulled him down and kept him fighting to stay above water. For Josh, it turned into a weight he tried to carry by working harder, pushing further, pretending he was fine, even when he wasn't. And as one brother was struggling to get clean, the other was fighting battles no one could see, the kind that don't make headlines, but leave just as many scars. Josh's personal struggles. After their father passed away, Josh Harris found himself in a position that came with more pressure than anyone on the outside probably realized. The Cornelia Marie, the family's pride and livelihood, became tangled in ownership disputes that dragged on for years. Josh and Jake technically inherited their father's shares, but money troubles meant they couldn't handle the costs alone. They had to bring in investors, and by the time a few years had passed, the boat wasn't fully theirs anymore. There were multiple people involved in decision-making, and running it stopped feeling as straightforward as it once had. At the same time, the fishing world itself was changing. The profits that once kept families afloat were shrinking. Crab populations were affected by shifting temperatures, and tighter government regulations meant there were fewer opportunities to make a decent haul. Then, in 2022, Alaska shut down red king crab fishing for the first time in 25 years. That decision sent a ripple through the entire fleet, and Josh, like many captains, had to think fast about how to adapt. The sea that once gave everything now demanded even more. But while he was managing all that pressure publicly, there were quiet signs that Josh had his own struggles off camera too. In a podcast around 2020, he mentioned that he'd had periods in his life where he leaned on substances more than he should have. It's not rare in the world he comes from. The isolation, the exhaustion, the constant uncertainty. Even researchers from the University of Alaska have pointed out how common substance use is among fishermen trying to cope with that kind of lifestyle. Outside of work, Josh was also trying to hold down his role as a father. His daughter, Kinsley Ella, was born in 2013, and he often mentioned how she could twist him around her little finger. You could tell he wanted to be there for her in ways he hadn't been able to with his own dad. To show up, to be steady. There were glimmers of balance along the way. The Hillstrand brothers, old family friends, guided him when things felt unsteady. He found joy again in fishing, starred in more than 180 episodes of Deadliest Catch, and even got a spin-off that took him to Hawaii to follow traces of his father's old life. For a while, it looked like he'd made it through, still standing, still carrying the Harris name forward. And then, in 2022, a story from his past surfaced that no one saw coming, and everything he had built began to unravel. The fall. Back in 1998, when Josh Harris was 16, he was accused of sexually assaulting a 4-year-old girl, the daughter of a fellow deckhand and neighbor. Charges weren't filed until the following year, and he eventually pled guilty to lesser charges: 4th-degree assault and communicating with a minor for immoral purposes. His sentence included 30 days of confinement for each count, 24 months of supervision, 150 hours of community service, and a 2-year sex offender treatment program, along with a psychosexual evaluation. In total, he served 9 months. All of this happened long before Deadliest Catch existed, before Josh ever appeared on TV, when he was still learning the ropes of commercial fishing from his father, Phil Harris. For more than 20 years, this part of his past stayed largely out of public view. That changed in 2022 when online discussions resurfaced the old case. The details of Josh's guilty plea spread fast across social media and fan forums. Discovery Channel, under public pressure and not wanting to be tied to a sexual assault conviction, made a call. Josh Harris would no longer appear on future seasons of Deadliest Catch or any of its spin-offs. The Cornelia Marie, the family's iconic boat, was pulled from the show as well. Josh's final appearance came in Season 18, Episode 19, which aired that same year. The fallout was swift. His Instagram account, which had more than 130,000 followers, disappeared. Casey McManus, his co-captain since 2014, was also removed from the show even though he had nothing to do with Josh's past. McManus later shared how disappointed he was, especially since the crab fishing industry was already struggling after the pandemic. For Josh, everything seemed to collapse at once. What he'd done as a teenager was serious, and he faced the legal consequences at the time. But having it resurface 24 years later ended the life and career he had built since then. It stripped away the work he'd done to carry on his father's name and the income he relied on to care for his daughter. He had spent his adulthood trying to live up to Phil Harris's legacy, watching his father die on camera, trying to keep his brother Jake from falling deeper into addiction, and managing his own battles while running a dangerous fishing operation on national television. Just when it looked like he'd found some balance, his past returned and undid everything. As of now, Josh is no longer part of Deadliest Catch. The Cornelia Marie, once captained by Phil Harris for more than 20 years and a fixture on the show from Season 2 onward, has new owners. In June 2024, Taylor Jensen announced he and several partners had purchased the vessel. Josh's ownership share isn't clear. Reports from 2022 suggested he still had 40%, but that may have changed with the new partnership. What's clear is that Josh has stepped away completely from the spotlight. No social media, no interviews, no updates, just silence. The sadness in Josh Harris's story isn't one single event. It's the accumulation of everything. The loss of his father, his brother's addiction, the weight of expectation, and the shadow of a mistake made at 16 that followed him decades later. It's what happens when grief, legacy, and the past all collide, leaving someone trapped between who they were and who they tried to become. If you found this look at Josh Harris's story compelling, make sure to like and subscribe. What part of Josh's story resonated with you? Let us know in the comments below. Check out the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.